If a product owner from UiPath is looking at this video, guys, put that on the list. We're going to make a petition here. Hi guys, welcome to another video. Well, this will not be a tutorial, but instead I have decided to change a bit the flow. And I decided to discuss about some sensible topics like how do you apply the UiPath best practices. Now, best practices are useful in case you want to have a robot which is maintainable over time and somehow to have a standard of quality assurance. And I discovered the article written by Lahiru, which by the way, I'm gonna leave a link here in the description. This is our starting point. And what should be the best way to discuss about the UiPath practices rather than discuss with the author. So this is what this video about, and I want to thank him again for accepting this invitation. Now the reason of this is because we are coming from two different backgrounds. I'm a .NET developer and I do .NET since 2010, and in case you don't know, the whole UiPath platform is built on the .NET platform, and he is solution architect and UiPath MVP. So why we should make this debate? So in this video I'm gonna go through all of the topics that he wrote in the article, and that's our starting point. Well, I don't want to lose your time, but I want to give you some context why we have decided to go with this approach. So let's jump to the video. So hi Lahiru, and thank you for accepting this invitation.
Hi Daniel, so it's very nice to have this conversation with you. So it's an honor actually. So
it's the first time when we have this conversation. It's the first time when we are meeting each other.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. So how should we do that? Okay. I have read your article, and you have put a lot of effort to write this. I mean, related to the project organization, what do you think should be? I don't know. Can you give us some use cases? I don't know, some a story, like a story. How did you face it? I don't know, before knowing these best practices.
Okay. Yeah. So about the project organization, it's mostly focusing on how we can actually reduce the development time and introduce some of the reusable components. So, and I have actually seen the different workflows that are quite bulky, and it's very hard to properly understand what's actually going on there. Even for a well-experienced person, it could be difficult without proper comments and a proper structure. So what I'm suggesting here is when it comes to this project organization, we can always have some kind of a template which we can use. So these templates we can build over time as and when we complete different projects. But there can be some sort of a general structure that we can use, something similar to the RE framework that we all know. We can also maintain a reusable component library within the organization. So I know that the marketplace is already there, that we can use a lot of reusable components from that place. But still, there can be components that are very specific to the organization and that cannot be on a public website. Mm-hmm. So we can have your own reusable library, which we can use within our automation projects.
You have mentioned reframework. What do you think is the main reason UiPath created the reframework?
I think there are a couple of reasons.
Because for me, it's somehow you have mentioned project organization. So I don't want to guide you, but related to project organization, I think we are on the same track. You have mentioned reframework and project organization, and for me as a developer, I really think reframework, one of the important thing has this project organization also, but I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, so I agree with your point. And apart from that, I can also mention that with the use of RE framework, it actually brings you more control for the solution, because it has a good level of error handling and all these application exceptions, business exceptions that we might not use when we are just building it from scratch.
Yeah.
So you have that structure in place, and you have that looping and every concept within that. which we can easily use just by few configurations here and there. We can easily fit it into our project. So I think that's the main reason why they have introduced the RE framework.
I mean, indeed, the functionality, it is there. It can be activated, the retry mechanism and so on. But I think the main purpose, I mean, if I'm going to put in a balance, the features and the organization, I think it's more important for me, organization, because somehow this way you can align a lot of RPA developers, or you're forced to be aligned. It's somehow like an architect, like I guess you already do that when you're working. So it's somehow like an alignment between most RPA developers to be easy to communicate and to collaborate to the same project, because in the end, okay, you can deliver the project, but I think that the hardest resource is to align people, to educate people, let's say. As long as you start to learn this technology, and thanks to you, because I mean, people are so curious. Okay, how do you apply best practices to UiPath? And you see this article and you say, okay, I want to do that, but why that, you know? And for me, for instance, I find very important, not necessarily to know how to resolve a thing, but to understand why. I mean, if I'm gonna have a look here to the UiPath documentation, I can argue. I mean, I can start some discussion even from their documentation. And it's not something which is something bad or right. No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's just different points of opinion. And actually, that's the reason I wanted to initiate this conversation with you. And thank you for accepting that. And as long as you have some reasons and you understand why, because some solution is good and some solution is good in other way, you know, and you need to make this balance. This one is, I find it tricky and interesting, I would say, in having an RPA develop, in creating a project, a maintainable project, like I said.
Yeah, I just remember the story. So this is when actually back then I was in a different company. Back then when we were starting up the RPA team in that company, we had to go through a lot of challenges, and our team was combined with people with different backgrounds.
Yeah,
I am originally from business intelligence and data warehousing. And the other guys in my team were some guy from mobile development and a couple of other guys from .NET background, and some of them are totally new. They are interns. So then we actually started up with one of our internal automations. Actually, before going into clients, we have to show something, right? So we were trying to build on that. And what happened is, at some point, we realized that I'm coding in a different way. The guy who knows .NET, he does it in a different way. And the interns, they do it in a totally different way. And once we combine everything, we see that there are a lot of issues there. So then we thought of, okay, so this is fine. Let's come up with some sort of best practices that we should use. So it's good for internal automation, but when we are giving out a quality product for a client, we cannot have things like that. So it's always good to have some sort of a standard that we can sell upon, saying that whenever we get into any project, we can always say that, hey, look here, we will develop your solution with this quality, and these are the standards that we are using. That concept is what actually triggered me to initially come up with these kind of best practices, documentation and everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I also got into this stuff. And then we actually implemented it. We actually did a documentation on it and shared it among the team, and we educated everyone. And we also got their ideas just to improve this. So we had the draft and we shared it with everyone and got their feedback, improved it further. And that's the thing that we used, that this is our best practice and these are the standards that we are going to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So related to naming conventions, someone told that giving a name and cache will be the hardest thing from a programming point. And indeed, RPA is somewhere in the middle, like programming and business intelligence, like you said. But naming, it's something challenging, I would say. Do you agree that naming should contain business value, like you said here, username, customer first name?
Well, in my opinion, I believe yes, the naming convention should be actually the name has to be something meaningful. So because it's not only us who is looking at this code, it could be our other team members. So when we are actually developing a code, we'll be developing in our own machines, and at some point we'll be combining everything together. So if at some point, if we, let's say we have a new team member that who is joining, and if he or she to go through this code and understand what we have done already, it's good to have a proper naming for these variables, so that just by looking at it, they know that this variable is used to hold something like this.
Yeah.
And it will be used in these locations.
How do you think about the variables temp, bin, or these type of things?
I actually don't recommend using things like that, because actually I have actually seen variables like that, and especially when it comes to these data tables, people use DT1, DT2.
Yes.
Like
I'm yeah, keep that in mind. I'm just gonna have a look here at the bottom. So what do you think about this DT underline?
It's the same thought again. So I actually don't recommend using stuff like that. I know it does the job, but when it comes to meaningful and some properly understandable code, by looking at DT1, I would know why it is there and whether it is even used or not.
I mean, to make a comparison between we humans and the variables, how about everyone should have in their name human Lahiru, human Daniel, or I don't know, the nationality or whatever description which is come right now in my mind. Keep that in mind. What do you think about these arguments? Because somehow when your arguments in your guideline, you said, okay, it's recommended to give in and output.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? And what do you recommend to use input and output for arguments?
Yeah, so why I said that is because one main reason.
Yeah.
So let's say we have variables like username, password, and stuff like that. So someone who is coding, so I'm from a technical background, so sometimes we might not really go to this variable panels, and sometimes we might not go to this argument panel. We just focus on the logic and how to build it. So at some point, we might actually think that this variable is actually an argument, and we might just use the arguments thinking that it's a variable. So again, coming back to the same point, having a proper naming for these variables and arguments. So variables, you can have that name, but when it comes to these arguments again, sometimes an argument might have a similar name, just like a variable. But having that direction there, it helps you when you're actually building the workflow. So if you want to refer to an argument, you know that if this is something that's coming in, you just can search for it, and you are sure that this is the argument that you're referring to.
Okay. I understand your point. Can I not be agree with you on this one?
Yeah, sure.
So I totally agree with the fact that DT underline to avoid this kind of stuff. Okay, that's the job, but it's not about that. And this is something from I know that in the documentation of UiPath they recommend to use this in and out. I don't know if someone from UiPath hears us, but maybe to have this as a warning, or depending somehow. Have you used the project analyzer? Somehow should be like an architect, or I don't know. You can use this guideline, but I would not recommend. Instead, I would create and force a rule, which I would just say, okay, your username you can be username, user ID, And if there is a parameter which is not initialized in the component, it should give an warning or an error. It's really depending on that could be a potential fix. I mean, it's not necessarily a potential fix. It's somehow an argument, because you cannot, UiPath doesn't know what you're trying to do there. So personally, I prefer to be consistent, or at least this is what I recommend. Again, that's why I don't know. It's not necessary to agree on this. But I would be consistent, and I would keep the username without in and out, and I would put a rule on this one. I don't know if it has. I don't know, to be honest. In the rules of the arguments, I don't know if there is a list, a rule which does that. I would be glad if someone would tell us. Drop us a comment, or actually we can have a look here after this meeting. I'm curious about this one.
So yeah, so there are like different ways of doing the same thing. So
yeah,
I might say that this is how it should be named, and you can have a different perspective. And again, I have met some people, they are actually using the variable type as well in the variable name, like str username.
Okay, I like that one.
It's the best practice. Yeah,
I think this one. This one it's cool. Yeah. Related to project organization, I think this should be the best practices. What do you think about this camel case or Pascal case? The first letter should be with a capital T. Do you find it important? I mean, if you're trying to make a comparison like the importance, if you were ranking from 0 to 10, how important would be to a variable to give a proper name, like a business name, like username, like, I don't know, how important would you rank this using the first letter as a capital letter? I think it's called Pascal case or camel case, and maybe I go wrong. How do you think would you rank this? And how about the arguments? So 3 rankings.
Yeah, so I would give the highest for the naming. You should have the proper business name.
Yeah.
And the way you type it, camel case or any format, I would say it's average, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't affect your way of doing stuff. It's just the way you write it. But it's good to follow one single way of doing it, other than someone will be using just full caps and the other guy using just full simple. I don't recommend that, but there should be one standard that all of us can follow.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you. I think I don't find it so important if you're using camel case or capital case, but at least have a look to the existing RPA flow. I mean, it looks ugly. I don't think it matters too much. I think it's more important to be consistent. So this one can be easily done with just when you browse the project. I think you can see that very easily. Yeah, that's a good tip to be consistent. Great.
And
the other
arguments, one. What was the question for arguments again? Sorry.
I think the same ranking.
So in terms of naming, if I give a common thing for the naming, yes, again, we should have a proper naming for arguments as well. Okay. But again, how you write it would be average. Just like with it.
Totally agree on this one. So workflow files. Okay, so workflow files. How do you name workflow files? You're giving that actually a very good, it's more than a best practice, it's a recommendation. It will be nice if the name can have a verb describing what the workflow does. So extract customer information. Well, I totally agree with you on this one. So using a verb, I have just something with the fact that it would be nice. I would enforce a bit higher, but yeah, definitely using a verb. I think I see it a mandatory. I don't came right now. It doesn't came right now an exception for that. but usually when you're calling a workflow, you expect something to happen. So you expect something to happen at the past. So that's the reason I think using a verb, because verb is like a command. Do that, do that, do that, do that. Not, okay, try to do that, be kind and do that. And I think that's the point where you try to talk about exceptions. I'm going to talk about exceptions later, but when you're trying to be demanding, a verb, it's really something to happen, right? To do something. Well, when you're saying something, do something, extract customer information, it's something which is demand for me. I mean, someone who calls the flow, expect that extraction to happen. So I would say it would not be nice, but instead use a verb. Use a verb, it will be easy for you.
Yeah.
So the next one is activities and containers. And UiPath workflow file should consist of multiple activities and containers. And in this example, you have given a sequence, right? You're having this initialized with a sequence where you're doing a get asset. I think that there are 2 assets from the orchestrator, right?
Yes.
And this is something which I don't do all the time. It's something which I highly recommend to do that. I'm trying to do this display name because it helps for error handling. A lot of things it helps. But when you do this decision, let's say you're gonna make this portion of initialization, but when you make the balance, when you make the decision that this initialization, this is because it's a compound, this is the part where I'm doing that, you decide to transform it to a workflow. But when you do this balance,
yeah, and I got your point. Yeah, so what I usually do is, so this comes as a part of my experience in architecting the solution as well, because I am a solution architect. So what I usually do is, when the workflow, I agree with you that having that full portion in one workflow will be easy to read and can easily understand what's happening there. But there might be scenarios where some logic is quite big and quite complex. So, and there can be scenarios where that particular part might be reusable in some other projects. Something like, for example, if we just say this initialization part, or even so let's say you have a different application, a web application, and that is involved in many different projects or processes. So the login part is, you are going to use that all the time. So instead of having it in a sequence, you can have it as a separate workflow file that can be reused in different other projects. So depending on those requirements that you see, you can actually decide whether to have it as a workflow file, or whether to move it to a different, or whether to have it within the big workflow as a small sequence.
okay.
What is your?
What is my opinion on this one?
Yeah.
Usually I'm very lazy when I make this split. So the decision I usually indeed to make sense, but generally I use this approach for testing. So I prefer to use a lot of splits. Generally I don't like to have the component bigger than 2 scrolls. Okay, I have a 4K monitor. So that 2 screens, you know, I don't like to have a workflow bigger than this. And I prefer to use splitting even if I use the component only once. So the criteria to make the split, I don't make it just because, okay, that's the best if you have something and you want to reuse, that's like a mandatory thing. But I use to, if it makes sense. Here in this case, initialize, what initialize? Initialize is really depending on the use case. So let's say we want to extract the customer name, okay? But extract the customer name from where? Let's make an assumption. Give me an assumption. Throw me something. Give me a problem here. So let's make it a real example.
Yeah, let's say that you have some data in a application, and you're going to access that data from the database itself. And
from the
that's
database
customer
itself?
data. Yeah.
Okay, so how do I access this data? Do I access via SQL or how do I?
Yeah, let's say it's a SQL database.
Okay, so it's a SQL server. I make a query and I'm gonna extract the customer information. Okay. So if the extraction, usually I would make a component which makes this extract customer name. I would not name maybe extract customer name. I would name it get customer. I don't know, get customer with, I don't know, I'm gonna make an argument ID or whatever. Maybe I make a bulk. Maybe I can get a lot of customers. So I can make a plural and that will return a data table instead. So I would use, because I'm demanding, extract is a bit kind for me. It's okay, I'm gonna extract, I'm gonna be soft. No, get me a customer. So get me a customer with this parameter. There's no big discussion. Okay, if you're gonna throw, just throw me, but don't return null. I mean, if you, and this is something which goes beyond this. If I want a component to return something null or to not throw, or I expect to throw, I would give a softer name. Let's say find. So find customer name. The find operation I expect to fail, but get customer name, I don't expect to fail. I mean, get me something, I want to grab something. So in this case, I would prefer to use the get customer with the parameter and return whatever it can return, I don't know, data table or whatever it turns as an output. And that would extract from a database or whatever would make sense to extract from an application. The implementation really doesn't matter. If the extraction, and I would somehow split, for instance, I don't know the use case, maybe you can give me, but I would try to keep it separately, the get customer name with the get assets from the orchestrator. I don't know what was the entire flow here, but if I would do it just by heart without knowing the context, I would prefer to keep it separately, because I can be more predictable. For instance, if I need to handle some error in the get customer name, I can put a try catch there. I can throw a business exception. Okay, I could not find the customer, and I'm gonna throw a business exception. That will not be, I don't know, an application exception or a SQL exception. I don't know, the server was not found or the server was down. So I have many reasons where I decided to make this split personally. I keep it. I was a bit long. I don't know if I was clear or not. But to make a recap, I would make as a mandatory, if I have something which is called twice, definitely let's create a component. Otherwise, if it makes sense, and it can make sense for exception handling, it can make sense for the fact that it's more readable. It can make sense even for shorten the workflow, because I want to keep my scrolling into 2 screens. Okay, this is just my preference. It's not I'm just gonna put with the knife to the people who he will come to me. You have 2 screens and a half, and I'm just gonna cut your throat. No, that's stupid. But at least try to make a balance. I don't want to just scroll a lot. And there are many. I mean, when you're dealing with a database connection, I don't know. Even the connection string, I would pass it to the get customer name, or I don't know, something like that. I would create like a context somewhere like that. So was I clear, or I don't know? Yeah. So this is my decision, because you asked me. But indeed, it's very nice and it's very good to give these names properly. I hope it was clear for the audience also. Okay, how you would make the split of the initialization part?
Right. So I agree with a lot of the points that you mentioned, especially that long scrolling. That's something that I also don't like to do, because sometimes when you have these workflows and when you have like a lot of activities inside that, especially these big activities like if conditions or the flowchart and everything, Sometimes you have to scroll down and sometimes you have to scroll horizontally. So that is something that I really don't like to do, because by looking at the workflow, I need to see the full thing. So that's something that I also look at. So apart from what I mentioned earlier, again, if you think or if you feel like that this workflow is quite lengthy or it's bulky maybe, and even within that workflow file, you might have different sections separated by a sequence or by a flowchart or whatever. So maybe I will look at ways of grabbing parts in that workflow and putting it into a different workflow, so that it will look more simpler and much more easy to read. So that's another way that I will do.
So let's go to the next part, where is workflow design, nested ifs. Do you have like a rule in your company how many ifs, let's say, you're gonna put in a sequence? Like, do you enforce this?
Yeah, we do. Because of one scenario that I had to face a couple of months back. It's actually about 2 years back this happened.
Yeah.
So once, it's a nice story again. So once we were during the initial stages of our journey in that company, we got the opportunity to do a POC, and we actually had to do it with a couple of other guys that are external from our company. So they are quite new to this RPA thing.
Yeah.
So what in the workflows that they designed, there were a lot of conditions to check in that process. So it's an invoice processing workflow, and there were like a lot of conditions to check here and there, and so it's like a nested set of conditions. If this is true, what's going to happen next, and if that is true, another set of conditions. So what that guy did is, when I opened the workflow, I saw that it's like a full list of if conditions.
That's artificial intelligence. No, that's artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
The guy was an AI specialist.
Yeah, so it was very, very, very difficult to really understand when you have if conditions like that. It's okay to have about 1 or 2, maximum 2, I would say, up to 2 levels. And going beyond that, your workflow will look crazy, and your head will start spinning when you try to understand what's going to happen. So because of that, I thought, okay, this is not a good practice, so let's enforce. So you can use if conditions, nested if conditions, only up to 2 levels. After that, if you're having anything like that, just go for a flowchart.
So UiPath, they're using Workflow Foundation for their dragging, for the visualization part. And they have a couple of limitations. I'm thinking about the UiPath Studio. They have a couple of limitations related to exception handling. If you have a try-catch block, and the catch block is empty, the finally block is not executed. There are a lot of debates on the forum on this. I still don't agree with this behavior. I think it's a feature. Okay, I agree that it's a feature for the Workflow Foundation, but it's a bug from the other point of view, from the older programming world. So I would say. But related, something which I was missing in UiPath is when you have a state machine and when you have a sequence, okay? So let's say you have your sequence, I don't know, you're just grabbing something from the screen, okay? So you have a small if, you have a small if in the sequence, a tiny one, okay? If something, I just want to stop the execution for the sequence, but without throwing an exception. Maybe I'm wrong. To be honest, I don't know. I don't know if this activity exists to just stop the execution for the sequence, and to somehow, if that rule would exist, the analyzer rule which we have talked previously, that would rule to be enabled and to enforce all the parameters to be set. So I think if this activity would exist to return, to get out of the sequence would be much easy, because you would say, okay, I just want to check, I don't know, let's find this find case, okay? So if this find case, I don't know, find the customer something, okay? So I don't find the customer, okay? So if something, I just want to stop the execution for the sequence, and I just want to return back, and I want, I don't know, just a few arguments to be set. So that would be nice if would exist. Manu, do you know if such thing exists, or?
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. So this is something that I have been also thinking for a while.
Yeah.
So when you actually develop quite complex stuff like that, so you can have different if conditions or even different flowcharts at different points, but still there can be this kind of scenarios can be there, and you can't just suddenly move into a flowchart and say, okay, you're going to stop here. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And particularly if you're inside a loop, that when things are going on, it could be a business case. That's a different story when it comes to business exceptions. But still, there can be scenarios where you actually need to stop the entire flow because of something is missing.
Not the entire flow. So not just to be clear. So I'm in a sequence. So let's say I have a state machine, a flowchart, where maybe I have another sequence. So I have a tiny sequence where I just get, let's take the previous example, get customer information, okay? So I don't want to throw an exception because it's part of my nominal case. I just want to get a customer. For me, it makes sense to not return a customer, okay? So I just want to stop the execution and then return. That's why this is the case which I was referring.
All right, okay.
So not terminate workflow, which throw in exceptions, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Something would be more gentle. Terminate, not terminate from terminator, like, I don't know, just kindly stop the workflow activity to exist.
Yeah, so it's something similar to that break activity which we use inside the loops.
Yes, exact. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think that kind of activities are there for now.
If someone from UiPath, if a product owner from UiPath is looking at this video, guys, put that on the list. We make a revenge here. We're going to make a petition here.
Yeah, so it's good to have something like that. So what we usually do is we just add a condition and put everything on the other side, and the other side is totally blank. So you just do nothing and get out of the workflow or the sequence.
Yeah, I mean, you can create another workflow, another sequence, like, I don't know, append a name internal, but that would make the things, I mean, that would make a separation of concern. It would separate the things and would not be the same thing. It's like I'm having a glass of jar, and I cannot get the entire jar. I cannot eat the entire jam, everything in the jar. I can just eat half, you know? Maybe it's a limitation for the workflow foundation. I'm just gonna have a look here on the forum. Yeah. So workflow design, yeah, this is I think there is no discussion. State machine rules as a global process, flowchart for decisions. How do you make this mix between flowcharts and sequence?
So usually what I do is, when it comes to this user interface automation, the things are pretty straightforward and it's quite sequential. Everything happens one after the other. So in those cases, I would use a sequence, and I use the flowchart especially for when you're handling a lot of data related stuff. Like checking whether the data is there, or checking whether it's you are trying to find a particular value is there or not, something like that. So especially when it comes to those data related stuff and conditions, I would go for a flowchart because it gives me a clear picture that this is what's happening here. And also when you're dealing with this, and again, business rule exceptions is also part of that. Mm-hmm. So what I would do is sometimes I use the mix in certain instances, or else I would go for a separate workflow and handle the business logic there and come back to the sequence once that is over.
Okay, you are referring nested in line in a sequence or separate? Oh yeah, I think there are two things here. When you're putting a flowchart which is inside the sequence, and the other way around. So I was not thinking to that, but that's a good point. So when you're doing that, this is what you're replying to now.
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah. So again, when it comes to those complex business logics and everything, I would always go for a separate workflow.
Yeah.
And call it inside the sequence. And if you're like doing some not that complex, but still you need to do some data related checks while you go through that sequence.
Let's give people some examples. So let's talk about this customer name which you're giving here. This customer name, let's say it has an age, okay, and you want to display based on only that age. I'm just gonna simplify the things. A reward. If you have under 20, you're gonna say something. If you have above 20, you're gonna say something, and something like that. This is definitely a case for flowchart, right? Okay, so let's say you're gonna have get customer information. Okay, I'm just gonna make the assumption for here. Get customer information that you want to return the customer name, and you want to return this message based on the age. By the way, the age is retrieved inside the workflow. So how do you make this decision about this customer? So how this is a describing for the customer, you know, and it's somehow related to, I don't know, your project owner, or you would create a separate workflow for that it will receive a parameter for age and it will return, let's say, a string, or you would put inside the get customer information component in line.
Well, for this one, I would go for a mixture. So inside that sequence, I will just put in a flowchart and do the segregation there.
Yeah.
So, because it's a simple check. But when it comes to those complex stuff, it's maybe not only the age, but let's say you're also getting some, let's say a finance scenario here. You're getting some financial information like account balances and some transactions that happened for a particular period, and you're checking for some stuff there within those transactions. So that could be much more complex than that, just than checking an age. So for those things, I would go for a separate workflow to have things simpler and easy to understand.
Yeah, I agree with you on this one. So I think it's okay. Some advantage which I find using this separate workflow, testing. So testing, I think, is something which is ignored. I mean, it's not ignored, but it's putting on the part. Everyone should focus. Okay, I'm just gonna use computer vision. I'm just gonna use orchestrator. I want to learn modern user interface. I just want to learn a bunch of things, and they forget about these things, which at the end, it makes the code more readable and it makes it more appealing for other humans, if I would say, and it will help to align more humans. I think it's a bit more harder, not impossible, to align at this level, this kind of things, rather than, I don't know, just go hard way. Okay, I'm just gonna have this data. Should we use computer vision, or I don't know, whatever thing from UiPath? This kind of hard decisions, you know, because in that way you can just make, okay, I'm just gonna go with this solution because that and that. You're gonna make you're gonna have some data, and you're gonna make some decision, and you will argue that decision. But if you go on this level, I don't know, it's a good thing to learn and learn yourself also.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So yeah.
Something else which you like to add, maybe, about this workflow design?
Yes, one more thing. So when we are talking about these sequences and flowcharts,
Yeah.
so sequence is fine. You can have number of sequences inside a sequence. So that acts as a separate container to group different activities that you have. So on the other hand, you might also think about what about having flowcharts inside another flowchart?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the trickiest. This should be one of the interview questions. Can you do a flowchart inside a flowchart?
You can actually use it in UiPath.
And then it comes, is it useful? How useful it is, you know? You have it there. I mean, the guy from UiPath really gave it to you to use it or just to be an Easter egg, you know?
Yeah, so it's a quite common scenario. So based on from what I have heard from different people, they are using. Some people are actually using it, but I don't know why. What makes it easy to use? Have different flowcharts. So having a sequence like that.
Can you share with the community? I don't know, an example which you face it and.
Yeah. So
your opinion on this? Yeah.
Yeah. So my opinion is, in a sequence, having different sequences is fine. But when it comes to a flowchart, it's a little bit different. So in a flowchart, you can have many different things. It's not a sequence anymore, but you can have different decisions and even multiple decision nodes, where the path breaks into maybe 5 or 6 other different paths that different things happen there. And inside that, if you are to actually open another flowchart inside a flowchart, if you look closely, you will actually navigate or zoom into that particular flowchart so that everything else is not visible to you. Instead, you have to go back and see what's happening in the top level. So it is. I don't think that it's a good way of using flowcharts because it's hard to read and hard to understand what's happening. So if you really need to have that kind of decisions, have it in one flowchart. So that will give you the full picture of what's actually going on there. That's my thought. Again, I remember this scenario where, again, a couple of months back, one guy from Philippines, he was working on a project and he wanted me, for some issues, he wanted me to have a look at it and just fix it because he was unable to do that. So while I was going through his code, I came across this particular scenario where he has a very large flowchart, and inside that you have another bunch of flowcharts. So I was thinking, so it was very difficult to, read through that. So I just asked him why you did this. So he was saying that, okay, I have a lot of conditions here and it looks big, and because of that, I wanted to have it separately. So I said, okay, your thought is good. You want to have it separately, but not like this. Just do it in a much better way.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, he was having in a separated way, okay? He was right.
Yeah.
Now it's like you're reading the contract agreement, and you are not specific enough what this separated means. So in the end, if you're reading the documentation, it's separate here. It's not inside. I mean, it's separate, He was right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I said, okay, that is fine. Just do it in a much better way. Put it into either a different workflow, so it looks nice, or maybe try to put everything together.
Yeah. That's cool. Okay, so that was the workflow design. We have discussed a lot of topics. I hope it was valuable. Thank you, Lahiru, for being here and tell us and sharing from your experience. I really love to hear that. And the fact with the flowcharts is like an exception. And I think it's the first time when I put this to here, tutorial case. thank you for being here. And with you guys, I'm just gonna continue in the part 2. We'll tackle the remaining topics from this article.
And thank you, Daniel, for this amazing opportunity. So it's a really good topic, and it's something that we really need to discuss because there are a lot of thoughts around these things, and it's always good to discuss and share the different ideas that we have. So thank you very much for inviting me for this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for accepting.